the early Israel's history. In our first lecture, we will have an overview of the Old Testament. In this lecture, we will have a brief review of the Old Testament before we look into detail about early Israel's history. This lecture aims to make you familiar with the structure and various developments of the Old Testament books and their major divisions. The Old Testament can be read from different perspectives, and each contributes to the richness of meaning recognized in these texts by generations of readers. The Old Testament is a collection of ancient literature. These texts reflect the history of people called Israel. Behind and beneath the text lies a wide variety of social contexts that give rise and shape the text. In this text, we see how God used various individuals to write down what He has done through their life and in the life of Israelites. Formation of the Old Testament. What is the Old Testament? At its simplest level, this term comprises two words, an adjective and a noun. Dictionaries explain that the noun derives from the Latin testamentum, meaning a will, as in last will and testament. An older use of the term understood is a covenant. The first occurrence of the word for covenant in the Bible, Hebrew, buried, appears in Genesis 6:18. There God establishes His covenant with Noah and his family when they enter the ark. God promises to deliver them. The word occurs again after Noah exits the ark in Genesis 9:9-17. Here God promises never to destroy the earth again and present the rainbow as sign of this covenant. From the beginning, the covenant established a relationship between God and humanity, one of the preservation and salvation. For this reason, the term covenant or testament signifies a document that describes such a relationship and brings salvation to humanity. The adjective that describes this testament or covenant is old. The term Old Testament or Old Covenant does not appear in the Old Testament itself. Prior to modern times, readers assumed that the texts of the Hebrew Bible were composed by important figures from Israel's history, individuals like Moses, Joshua, or Samuel, who took it upon themselves to record their experiences. This traditional understanding of biblical authorship originated in the texts themselves. For example, several passages refer to Moses writing God's commands. Example, Exodus 17:40, 24:4, 34:28. And many others make mention of the law of Moses. For example, Joshua 8:30-31. Clues like this lead readers to identify Moses as the author of Pentateuch. With the dawn of the modern era, however, scholars began to prosper other models of Hebrew Bible's formation in the light of new reading methods and the textual details they revealed. Scholars in classical studies had developed particular ways of analyzing the Greek and Roman literature in order to determine how these texts were composed, when they were written, and how they were edited, and what situation brought them about. As early as the 17th century, biblical scholars began to adopt these methods and apply them to Hebrew Bible. Their analysis first took note of obvious issues in the flow of Pentateuchal stories, things like the repetition of a story, multiple introductions or changes in writing styles and grammar within a story, or interpretation in plot. Instead of attempting to resolve these narrative problems by means mosaic authorship, modern scholars saw these hurdles as clues to a different model for Hebrew Bible's composition. This never model understood the Bible to be the result of an extensive writing, editing, and compiling process that brought individual traditions together into larger books over a period of time. Some critical scholars understood much of the Hebrew Bible to be product of Persian period. Many texts were composed during exile and after. Scribes from those periods continually edited and supplemented whatever written traditions they inherited from pre-exilic time. The biblical texts as they now stand are either the written by or editorial product of Persian and Hellenistic Jews. That is what few scholars believe and teach. But Jews believe that the Old Testament is the collected faith testimony and collected testimony of the ancient Israel. As faithful accounts from biblical heroes, these texts were believed to be trustworthy representation of Israel's experience and God's character. According to this traditional perspective, the Hebrew Bible was simply a collection of individually authored texts composed and collected over several centuries. From a Christian viewpoint, it is significant that, as far as we can tell, it's the collection of scripture that Jesus and his first followers would have recognized. Most of the books are quoted in the New Testament. Formation of Tanakh. The Hebrew Bible is often called the Masoretic text. Is a collection of 24 books written in Hebrew. This is basic text from which several English traditions are rendered. The Old Testament is the Christian term for the collection of the scrolls in Hebrew and Aramaic that the Jewish community accept as scriptures, and which it often referred to as the Torah or law, the prophets and writings, or Tanakh for short, from the ancient letters of the three Hebrew nouns, Torah, Nevi, and Ketubim. The word Tanakh was brought in. Rabbinic Judaism used several acronyms to name various things. The word Mikra is another title for Tanakh. The name Mikra, meaning that which is read, is another Hebrew word for the Tanakh. While Tanakh stands for literature, Mikra was used for text that was read publicly. The Jewish canon and the Protestant Christian canon are not the only two examples of the manner in which books are honored in the Old Testament. However, they have become the dominant means of organization. Development of the Hebrew Bible canon. Etymologically, canon is a semantic long word that originally meant reed, but came to mean measuring reed, and hence a rule or standard or norm. It was in the later part of the 4th century AD that Christian writers began to refer to the collection for list of the scriptures as canon, using a Greek term for straight rod or rule, and thus the criterion. By the 3rd or 4th century AD, what we know of the Old Testament appears. There is no scholarly consensus as to when the Hebrew Bible canon was fixed. These were collections of scrolls. Since the whole Old Testament had grown and could not be contained within the single scroll, it was distributed across many scrolls. For this reason, the fixed order of the Old Testament canon did not appear until later, when manuscripts were bound in the codex. Some scholars argue that it was fixed by the Hasmonean dynasty, while others argue it was not fixed until the 2nd century CE or even later. According to the Talmud, much of the content of the Tanakh was compiled by the men of the Great Assembly, a task compiled in 450 BC and has remained unchanged since that date. Formal closure of the canon has often been ascribed to Rabbinic Judaism after the destruction of first temple in 587 BCE. The 24 books canon is mentioned in the Midrash Kohelet 12:12. The Protestant canon of the Old Testament has 39 books. This doesn't mean that more books were added to the Protestant canon, but a few books were unpacked. When we use the term canon of the Old Testament, we thereby denote the Old Testament is a closed collection of writings inspired by the Spirit of God, that they have normative authority and are held as the rule for our faith and life. Since the Reformation, Protestants have accepted the 39 books from Genesis to Malachi that appear in the standard edition of the Bible in Bible printed today. Christian Bible have made 4 divisions by adding a category for the historical books separate from the prophets. This follows the usage of ancient Greek translation Septuagint of the Old Testament. The 4 divisions of the Septuagint are Pentateuch, historical books, wisdom writings, and prophets. In contrary to the Jewish order, which emphasized the certainty of the Torah, Christians tend to arrange the books to form a narrative that begins with the creation in Genesis and ends with the prophetic pointing to Christ. The chronology of the books in any of the division is difficult to determine. The names of various sections should not lead to conclude that the sections embrace only material suggested by the names. Just because the first part is called the law does not mean that it contains nothing but laws or rituals. The name assigned to the section indicate that the major themes or emphasis of the sections are on the one kind to or the other. Language and pronunciation. The major part of the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, a branch of the larger family of the language known as Semitic. The original writing system of Hebrew text was an abjad, consonants written with some applied vowel letters. During the early Middle Ages, scholars known as the Masoret create single formalized system of vocalization. This was chiefly done by Aaron ben Moses ben Asher in the Tiberias school based on the oral traditions for reading the Tanakh, hence the name Tiberian vocalization. It also included some innovations of Ben Naphtali and Babylonian exiles. However, a large portion of Daniel and a little part of Ezra Nehemiah was written in Aramaic, also a Semitic language and a closely related Hebrew. Aramaic portion of the Hebrew Bible includes Daniel 2, 4 to 7, 28, Ezra 4, 8 to 6, 18, 7, 12 to 26, 9, 6 to 26, and Jeremiah 10, 11. Old Testament history. Both Jewish and Christian tradition universally consider the Old Testament historical records to be completely reliable in all points. With the advent of modern rationalism and naturalism, however, the Old Testament was subjected to massive attack on its history. Historians demonstrated, for examples, that because there was no record of a Hittite people in ancient extra-biblical history, there must be mistake in the Old Testament where reference to the Hittites made, Genesis 15:20, 25:9. But it was later discovered that Hittite people constituted one of the most powerful empires in the Near East in the 18th through 12th century BC. The result of the modern archaeological historical research have been even more amazing for pre-monarchical Hebrew history. The most skeptical scholars had maintained that Old Testament history, beginning with David, was quite reliable. They declared anything earlier than that, however, was outside the realm of true history. The figures of the judges, Joshua, Moses, and especially patriarchs were nothing but a shadow and idealized representation convinced by Israel to give history and covenantal claims some kind of romantic and meaningful origin. Anyone or anything pre-Abrahamic was immediately considered to be legendary, if not fictitious, domains of prehistory. Now, however, all this estimation is rapidly being re-examined and rejected. Those who thought a century ago that Moses could not have written the Pentateuch because the writing has not developed as an art until after his time have been completely confounded. Furthermore, many generally considered that the entire historical situation in Canaan and Egypt in the time of Moses and Joshua was exactly what Bible describes it to have been. Cuneiform tablets from such places as Nuzi, Mari, Alara, and Ebla provide fascinating accounts of civil, social, business, and political life from this period or a little later. And the accounts are given in the Old Testament from the patriarchal age fit harmoniously into the entire historical and cultural context. The foregoing is not intended to suggest that all Bible scholars are now completely convinced of the absolute historical accuracy and reliability of the Old Testament. Yet, there is no question that it has come to be appreciated as a record of revelation that fits marvelously into an actual historical background, one that can be demonstratively verified by all the skills of modern historical research. The Old Testament is witness to Israelites' faith and thought. It has a historical background. Its special and individual events may be history in the commonly understood sense. For example, the Exodus is biblical event that fits in nicely with the historical milieu of Egypt and Canaan during this period, but because of its supernatural character, obviously cannot be considered factual history. This is what many scholars think, that there is no reliability on the things that we see there in the Bible, but the archaeological, other historical developments shows that these are reliable and there are proof for all those things. In this lecture, we had a brief survey of the origin and development of the Hebrew and the Protestant canon, as well as some scholarly views regarding its formation.